The morning everything changed began like every other morning in the house. I built with blistered hands and stubborn hope. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen curtains, catching the dust in the air like tiny drifting stars. I stood at the stove, stirring oatmeal in the same chipped saucepan I had used for nearly 30 years. The clock above the refrigerator ticked steadily, reliable and indifferent. Outside, the maple tree my husband planted when our son was born swayed gently in the early breeze. Its branches brushed the upstairs window with a soft whisper, like it was checking on us. That house had always felt like protection. Brick and mortar, yes, but also sacrifice, endurance, love. I ran my fingers across the counter, over the faint scratch marks left by toy cars decades ago. Daniel had loved racing them in circles while I cooked dinner after double shifts at the nursing home. The scratch marks had never bothered me. They were proof of life. Proof that every hour I worked, every ache in my back, had been worth something. When my husband died suddenly of a heart attack, Daniel was only 14. The mortgage was still heavy, the insurance barely enough to cover funeral expenses. I remember sitting at this very table, hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, staring at the numbers and realizing that no one was coming to rescue us. It was just me. I could have sold the house. Many told me to. It was too big for two people, they said. Too expensive. Too much responsibility for a widowed woman working overtime. But the house wasn't just square footage. It was Daniel's childhood. It was the only constant left after we lost his father. Selling it would have felt like burying him twice. So I worked. I picked up extra shifts. I took night classes to earn certifications that would increase my pay. I learned how to fix leaking pipes from online videos and replaced cracked tiles myself. I skipped vacations. I mended old clothes. I refinanced when interest rates dropped and negotiated every bill down to the penny. Struggle built this house. Stability grew inside it. By the time Daniel finished college, first in our family to do so, the mortgage was finally paid off. I remember the day the bank sent the final statement. I held the envelope like it was a medal. Freedom tasted quiet, not loud. It felt like standing in the living room alone and whispering, "We made it." Daniel hugged me that night. "You did this, Mom," he said, eyes bright with pride. Those words were worth every sacrifice. When he told me he was in love, I was happy for him. Truly. He brought her over for dinner one Sunday in early spring. Her name was Claire. She was beautiful in a polished way, carefully styled hair, measured smile, intelligent eyes that scanned the room before settling on me. I noticed that. She complimented the house. "It's charming," she said, glancing at the wood beams in the ceiling. "Very traditional." Traditional. The word hung between us like a polite judgment. I laughed lightly. It's held together with more determination than tradition. She smiled back, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. At first, everything seemed normal. They visited often. We shared dinners. Claire asked questions about Daniel's childhood, about my work, about how long I had lived there. I mistook curiosity for connection. When they got engaged, I offered to help with the wedding. I dipped into my savings to contribute, though I insisted it was a gift, not an obligation. Claire accepted graciously, but I noticed she never once asked if I was sure. She simply said, "That will really help." The wedding was beautiful. Daniel looked happy. That was all I needed. After they married, housing prices were rising. Daniel mentioned casually one evening, "Claire thinks it might make sense for us to stay here for a while, Mom. Save money. Build equity." I didn't hesitate. "Of course, this is your home too." And I meant it. They moved into the upstairs bedroom that used to be Daniel's. I cleared out closets, rearranged furniture, gave them space. I told myself this was the natural order of things, generations overlapping, love expanding. For a while, it felt warm again. The house buzzed with new energy. Claire rearranged some decor. She replaced my floral curtains with neutral ones. "Just freshening things up," she said. I nodded. Change wasn't the enemy. But slowly, something shifted. Claire began referring to the house differently. Not home, but property. Not your living room, but this space. At dinner one night, she asked, "Have you ever thought about what the house is worth in this market?" I shrugged. "It's worth what it's given us." She laughed softly. "I mean financially." Daniel chimed in. "Claire's just interested in investments." Investments. The word felt foreign against these walls. One evening, as we sat on the back porch, Claire said, "It must be hard maintaining a place this size at your age." At your age. The phrase was gentle, almost concerned, but it carried weight. "I manage just fine," I replied. Daniel squeezed my shoulder. "Mom's tougher than she looks." They both laughed, but I heard something underneath, something like assessment. Months passed. Conversations about finances became more frequent. Claire worked in real estate marketing, and she often spoke about market trends. "It's actually inefficient," she said once, scrolling through her tablet at the kitchen table, "to have so much capital tied up in a single asset." I was drying dishes. Capital. "The house," she clarified. I looked around. The photographs on the walls. The dent in the hallway from when Daniel rode his bike inside against my rules. The faint stain near the fireplace from a spilled cup of cocoa the winter his father died. Capital. Daniel began spending more evenings upstairs with Claire instead of watching television with me like he used to. That was natural, I told myself. He was married now. I couldn't expect him to remain my little boy. But sometimes I would hear their voices through the ceiling, low, serious, deliberate. When I entered a room, conversations would pause, then resume with lighter tones. One afternoon, I found a stack of brochures on the kitchen counter. Assisted living facilities. Bright photos of smiling seniors playing cards in sunlit rooms. My hands went cold. When Daniel came home, I held one up. "What's this?" He blinked, surprised. "Oh, Claire picked those up, just information." Information about what? "In case you ever, wanted something easier." Easier? I don't recall saying I wanted to leave my home. Claire entered the room then, smooth as ever. "We're just thinking ahead, planning, it's responsible." Responsible. I forced a smile. Planning is good, but planning for what? "For the future," she said, as if that explained everything. I nodded and placed the brochure back down carefully. The future will come, whether we plan it or not. That night I lay awake listening to the house breathe. The heating system hummed softly. Pipes clicked as temperatures shifted. For the first time in decades, the walls felt thinner. Trust had always been my anchor. I trusted my son. I trusted the love that built this house. But trust, I began to realize, can be quietly eroded, not shattered, not exploded, just worn down like stone under steady water. Daniel started handling more of the household bills. "Let me help, Mom," he insisted. "You shouldn't have to worry about all that." I appreciated the gesture, but then I noticed mail being redirected. Statements arriving addressed jointly. Subtle changes. One evening, I walked into the living room and found Claire on the phone. "Yes, she's still healthy," she said softly. "No, not officially diagnosed, but we're concerned about long-term capacity." I froze in the hallway. Long-term capacity. She turned and saw me. Her expression didn't falter. "I'll call you back," she said smoothly, ending the call. "Who was that?" I asked. "Just a friend," she replied. The air felt different, thicker. Later that week, Daniel mentioned something else. "Claire thinks it might be smart to put the house in a trust, for tax reasons." "A trust," I repeated. "It would simplify things, in case anything happens." "To whom?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. "To you, or anyone." Anyone. The house had survived grief, debt, storms, and decades. But now it felt like it was being appraised, not for memories, but for liquidation. I tried to ignore the tightening in my chest. I reminded myself that I was not frail, not confused, not incapable. I still drove, still worked part-time, still managed my affairs. Age can make you invisible. It can also make you underestimated. One afternoon, I decided to clean out the hallway cabinet. It had become cluttered since Claire moved in. Inside, beneath a stack of neatly organized folders, I found a document I had never seen before. A draft, property transfer paperwork. My name was printed at the top. Beneath it, legal language about transferring ownership under certain conditions: incapacity, medical determination, voluntary reassignment. Voluntary. My signature line was blank. I sat on the floor, document trembling in my hands. The house I had fought to keep was being repositioned, quietly, strategically. That evening at dinner, I watched them more closely. Claire's hand rested lightly on Daniel's arm as she spoke. She framed ideas as suggestions, concerns as solutions. She was careful, always careful. "I worry about Mom being alone during the day," she said. "What if she fell?" Daniel frowned. "Maybe we should look into in-home assessments." Assessments. I set down my fork. "I haven't fallen." "Not yet," Claire said gently. "Not yet." The invisible threat was no longer invisible. Days later, I overheard something that stripped away the last layer of doubt. It was late. I had gone upstairs to retrieve an old photo album. As I approached their bedroom, their door was slightly open. Claire's voice drifted out. "If we move quickly, it'll be easier. Once the paperwork's in place, we can list it within the year." Daniel sounded uncertain. "But she's not gone." "She doesn't have to be," Claire replied. "There are ways to manage transitions, assisted living, medical evaluations. We just need the right documentation." My heart pounded so loudly, I thought they might hear it. "She trusts you," Claire continued softly. "That's the advantage." Advantage. I stepped back into the hallway shadows, my breath shallow. In that moment, something inside me shifted. Confusion hardened into clarity, hurt cooled into awareness. They weren't planning my comfort. They were planning my exit. Not dramatic, not violent, just strategic, legal, clean. The house that symbolized love had become leverage. I returned to my room quietly and sat on the edge of my bed. The maple tree brushed the window again, its branches tapping gently like a warning. For years, I had believed strength meant sacrifice. That love meant giving without question. That peace meant ignoring discomfort. But as I stared at the walls I had painted myself decades ago, I understood something else. Survival requires more than kindness. And if they believed my age made me powerless, they had forgotten who built this house in the first place. I didn't cry. I didn't confront them. Instead, I reached into my bedside drawer, pulled out a small notebook, and began to write. Dates, conversations, documents found. If they were planning my exit, then I would begin planning my defense. Innocence was over. Awareness had arrived. And this house, built on love, was not going to fall quietly. The morning after I began writing everything down, Claire brought me coffee in bed. She had never done that before. She knocked softly, her voice dipped in honey. "I thought you deserved a little pampering." I pushed myself up against the headboard and accepted the mug. Her eyes scanned my face carefully, as if measuring something invisible. "You've seemed tired lately," she added. "Maybe overwhelmed." "Overwhelmed?" "I sleep just fine," I said. She smiled. "Of course, it's just we worry." "Way." Daniel hovered in the doorway behind her. He looked uneasy, like a man caught between two tides. Love versus loyalty, habit versus influence. That afternoon, Claire laid documents neatly across the dining table. "Just routine planning," she said brightly. "Power of attorney paperwork, medical directives, nothing dramatic." Nothing dramatic. I read slowly. The language was careful but clear. If I were deemed unable to manage my affairs, decision-making authority would shift, primarily to Daniel, secondarily to Claire. "Who drafted this?" I asked. "A family attorney a colleague recommended," she replied. "It's standard." Standard. I looked at Daniel. "Did you review this?" He rubbed his neck. "Claire understands this stuff better than I do." There it was, subtle displacement. She spoke, he deferred. I'm not signing anything today, I said calmly. Claire's smile tightened. Of course not, take your time. But pressure has weight even when disguised as patience. Over the next week, she mentioned it repeatedly. Just in case. Responsible adults plan ahead. You never know when cognitive decline can begin. Cognitive decline. She began leaving articles on the kitchen counter about early memory loss in seniors. She asked me casual questions and then repeated them later to see if my answers changed. Once, she corrected me unnecessarily in front of Daniel about the date of a family vacation 20 years ago. You see, she said gently to him, little slips. I felt heat rise in my chest, not confusion, clarity. If I appeared offended, I would look defensive. If I appeared angry, I would look unstable. So I chose something else. Stillness. At night, I continued documenting everything. Dates, phrases, witnesses, copies of the paperwork. I began scanning documents and emailing them to a new account Daniel didn't know existed. Then I did something they never expected. I made an appointment with a lawyer. Her name was Margaret Hale. We had gone to high school together, though we hadn't spoken in years. When she saw me in her office, she hugged me tightly. What brings you here? She asked. I placed the draft transfer documents on her desk. Her expression hardened as she read. Did you request this? She asked. No. Have you been evaluated by any physician for cognitive impairment? No. She looked up at me. Then someone is building a file. The words chilled me, but they also strengthened something inside me. Building a file meant planning. Margaret explained my options clearly. You are competent. You are independent. If you want to protect your assets, you need to do it proactively. Protection instead of defense. Within 2 weeks, we established a revocable living trust, with me as sole trustee and decision-maker. The house, my savings, everything, secured legally. No transfer without my explicit approval. No sudden shifts under vague claims of incapacity. I also scheduled a full cognitive evaluation with my physician. Thorough testing, documentation, proof of clarity. When the results came back, excellent memory, strong executive function, I kept copies in a locked drawer. At home, Claire escalated. She began insisting on attending my medical appointments for support. I declined gently. She started calling extended family, casually mentioning concerns about my forgetfulness. I received 2 sympathetic phone calls from distant cousins asking if I was feeling all right. Isolation by suggestion. Daniel grew quieter. I saw conflict in his eyes, but conflict does not always equal courage. He loved me, but he also loved peace, and Claire controlled the temperature of their marriage. One evening, Claire placed new documents in front of me. These are cleaner, she said. Simpler, just a signature. I read carefully. The signature line already contained a faint indentation, an outline where someone had practiced writing my name. My blood ran cold. Did you try to sign this for me? I asked evenly. Her expression flickered, just briefly. That's absurd. I held up the page. This indentation matches my name. Daniel looked from her to me. Claire. It's probably just a printing error, she said quickly. Printing errors do not rehearse signatures. I will not be signing anything, I said, my voice firm now. Claire's patience snapped. You're being paranoid, she said sharply. We're trying to help you, and you're turning this into some conspiracy. Daniel stood abruptly. Stop, both of you. But there was no equal footing here. One side operated from strategy, the other from reaction. That night, I overheard raised voices upstairs. She's stalling, Claire hissed. She's my mother, Daniel replied. And she's sitting on $1 million asset while we struggle. Struggle? I began looking deeper. Through public records and a quiet conversation with a former colleague of Claire, I discovered something she had never mentioned. Debt. Substantial personal loans. A failed investment in a speculative property development. Credit lines extended beyond comfort. The house wasn't just valuable to her. It was solution. A week later, karma arrived, not through my hands but hers. A certified letter came addressed to Claire. I handed it to her casually. Her face drained as she read. "What is it?" Daniel asked. "Nothing," she said too quickly. But Daniel reached for it. His eyes widened. Fraud investigation. Apparently, in her desperation to stabilize her finances, Claire had manipulated client funds in a marketing escrow account. Small amounts, she thought, temporary adjustments, but patterns leave trails. "You said you were handling everything," Daniel said quietly. "I was protecting us," she shot back. Protecting. The same word she had used to justify managing my future. Within days, formal charges were pending. Her employer terminated her contract. Bank accounts were frozen under review. Control had flipped. Suddenly, I was no longer the vulnerable one. Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table one evening, his face pale. "Is it true?" he asked. "Did she?" "Yes," I said gently. "It appears so." He swallowed hard. "And the house?" "The house," I replied, sliding a folder toward him, "is protected." He opened it slowly. Trust documents, medical evaluation results, legal confirmations. "You knew," he whispered. "I suspected," I corrected. "And you didn't tell me." "I was waiting to see whether you would ask." Silence filled the room like fog. "I didn't want to believe she'd do this," he said finally. "I thought you were just resisting change." Change versus removal. "I raised you to think," I said softly, "not to follow." He covered his face with his hands. Claire's desperation intensified. She accused me of orchestrating the investigation. She claimed I had sabotaged her. "I never touched your accounts," I said calmly. "Your choices did." Greed had created its own evidence. The confrontation that followed was not explosive. It was colder than that. "We need to sell the house now more than ever," Claire insisted. "We can settle everything and start fresh." "No," I said simply. "You're being vindictive." "No," I repeated. "I'm being careful." Daniel stood between us, but this time he did not waver. "Claire," he said quietly, "this stops." She stared at him as if seeing a stranger. "You're choosing her over me." "I'm choosing truth," he replied. Truth does not shout, it settles. Legal proceedings unfolded over months. Claire moved out temporarily, claiming she needed space. Investigators continued reviewing her financial misconduct. Consequences layered quietly, methodically. I did not celebrate. This was not revenge. It was gravity. Daniel began attending counseling. Alone at first, then with me. We spoke about influence, about guilt, about the difference between protecting a marriage and surrendering judgment. "I thought supporting my wife meant backing her every decision," he said one afternoon. "Support without discernment is surrender," I replied. He nodded slowly. Eventually, Claire filed for separation. Pride could not survive exposure. Her narrative of control had unraveled. Before she left the house for the last time, she stood in the foyer and looked around. "You think you won," she said bitterly. "This was never a competition," I answered. "It was to you." "No," I said, "it was survival." She shook her head and walked out. When the door closed, the house felt lighter, not triumphant but restored. Daniel stayed. Not as a dependent son, but as a humbled man, rebuilding his understanding of loyalty. We restructured boundaries clearly. Finances separate, legal transparency, no shared control without mutual consent. Months later, I walked through the living room at sunset. The same golden light spilled across the hardwood floors. The same maple tree brushed the upstairs window. The house was unchanged, but the power dynamic was not. I had once believed love required constant giving. I had mistaken silence for peace. I had underestimated the quiet intelligence that age provides. They had planned my exit carefully. But karma does not need an invitation. It arrives when choices accumulate. As I stood there, listening to the familiar hum of the house breathing around me, I understood something deeply and without bitterness. Love can be exploited. Trust can be tested. But wisdom, earned through sacrifice, sharpened by hardship, cannot be erased. I did not raise my voice. I did not seek revenge. I simply protected what I built. And in the end, integrity outlasted greed.